Hi, it's Sylvester, and I've often said on this channel that I began experiencing psychosis in 2019, but I don't know if that's necessarily true. I think I began experiencing psychosis way back in 2013. It's just that it was very mild, and it got worse and worse and worse until 2019 when it really, really got bad. Like in 2019, I started experiencing hallucinations. I was seeing things and hearing things that weren't there. My delusions got really bad. I started having extreme delusions and extreme paranoia. And so in 2019, there's no question in my mind that I became psychotic. But I would argue that the psychosis started way back in 2013, and it was like very mild at first, and then over the years it just kind of got worse and worse and worse, and the delusions that I had were snowballing and becoming worse and worse and bigger and bigger and bigger, and then finally in 2019 it all kind of, shit hit the fan, so to speak. Because if you don't know, in 2013, I was kidnapped and held against my will for over 3 months by a very awful man who did some very awful things to me. I have very severe PTSD because of what this man did to me. And so after I got away from the man who kidnapped me, I was kind of delusional. I was kind of paranoid. Not only was I paranoid thinking that he was going to find me again and hurt me or hurt my loved ones, or it was someone he was associated with would come find me. Like, I was very paranoid about that. But I also began experiencing some delusional thinking where I was convincing myself that the people around me were not on my side. And in my defense, it sure seemed like a lot of the people around me were not on my side. It really felt like a lot of people victim blamed me for what happened to me. It really felt like a lot of people hated me because of what happened to me. And so I don't know how much of it was in my head and how much of it was real, but I became convinced that the people around me were all secretly against me. And I also became very, very angry after I was kidnapped because I had really severe PTSD that I was not getting treatment for. I was not on medication. I was just very angry because this awful thing had happened to me. I was angry at the people around me because I felt like they didn't do enough to help me or to save me. And I was angry at the people around me because I felt like they blamed me for what happened, or that they hated me because of what happened. And so I became very angry, and that caused people to kind of turn on me or start pushing me away and start treating me like I was a problem, because my anger was a problem. And it's unpleasant to be around somebody who's angry all the time. So people started pushing me away and getting upset with me for being angry all the time. And that just fed into my delusions, the paranoid thoughts that I was already having, that these people were against me and that these people all secretly hated me. And these delusions only got worse over time. I started cutting people out of my life left, right, and center because I just thought everyone was against me, and I thought everyone was, plotting for my downfall in some way. And the delusions got worse, and I started to convince myself that these people, it was like, some kind of conspiracy where they were like, everyone around me were all working together to try to tear me down. I became convinced that again, and it just got worse and worse and worse. The more I convinced myself that the people around me secretly hated me and secretly blamed me, the more I convinced myself that these people were actually terrible people who were doing terrible things. Like my dad. I was really mad at my dad for a long time, and because of how he responded when I got kidnapped. And I felt like he was not supportive enough. I felt like he was not there for me when I really needed him. And so I was really mad at him. And then I, pushed him away, and I cut him out of my life at one point. And then the delusions just kept getting worse, and I just kept convincing myself, like, every time anything would go wrong in my life, it'd be like, my dad did this, he's plotting against me, he's working with my friends, turning all my friends against me, he's turning all my coworkers against me, where when in reality nobody was turning anyone against me. It's just I was turning people against me by being so angry and by being so insecure that I like pushed people away from me. And so like I was convinced that my dad at some point, like I convinced myself that the people around me were all addicted to hard drugs and they were selling hard drugs. And then I convinced myself that my dad was involved in some kind of pedophile ring at one point, because again, the delusions just kind of kept snowballing. And like the more I convinced myself that the people around me were not on my side, the more I convinced myself that they were actually evil and bad people and were doing bad things. And then those delusional thoughts again just kept getting worse and worse and worse until I was convinced that these people were doing like truly, truly awful stuff. Like at one point I thought my dad might be a serial killer, like, you know, like and that he was working with all the people around me to tear me down and to turn everyone against me, and that he was selling drugs to all the people that I loved. And like it was a lot of it was aimed at my dad. Like I really, really had a lot of delusional thoughts about my dad, but it wasn't just him. It was my friends and my mom and, you know, like everyone around me. Basically everyone around me, my neighbors, like people I didn't even know. I'd be walking down the street and I'd be like, I bet that person's working with my dad. You know, like these thoughts just like snowballed and got more and more and more out of control and more and more and more extreme until it got to a point where I genuinely thought there was this huge conspiracy against me and that the police were in on it and doctors were in on it and my favorite YouTubers were in on it. And then eventually it was like, you know, I started believing that there was a secret society and that like half the world was in on it. Like it got to a point where I thought that being kidnapped was something that was planned, that there was this secret society that had been out to get me for years and years and years, and they had me kidnapped in 2013, and that my friends and family and everyone around me knew about it and knew that it was this thing that was going to happen, and they wanted it to happen. And I thought, again, like the police were in on it, so I thought that the guy who kidnapped me was secretly working for the government, like he was an undercover FBI agent or something. Like I really thought that there was this like big conspiracy against me that everyone was in on. And then, you know, by 2019 it had gotten so bad that I was convinced that I was basically Jesus and the entire world was persecuting me. You know, like I was just like so delusional at that point that there was like no saving me, you know, like there was no convincing me that what I believed wasn't real, because I was so convinced, because for years and years and years these delusional thoughts just got worse and worse and worse and worse until finally I had a full-on breakdown and just started hearing and seeing things, just started straight up hallucinating, you know, like it got really, really bad in 2019. It got really, really bad, but I do think that the psychosis started long before that. And I don't know at what point it became full-blown psychosis. Maybe in 2019 when I actually started hearing voices and seeing things, maybe that's when it actually became full-on psychosis. But the delusional thoughts and the paranoia definitely happened long before 2019. And like I said, just kind of got worse and worse as the years went on. And I do believe that it all started in 2013 because, weirdly enough, getting kidnapped can do some fucked up shit to your brain, and so that's where I think it all started, really. And yeah, I guess that's really all I wanted to say. So thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. Stay frosty. Bye.